Hey there, Rednecks, Preppies, Redneck Preppies. It's me, the Redneck Preppy. How you doing today? Great? Good. It will come as no surprise to reloaders that measuring things is part and parcel of the experience. When you think about it, there probably isn't actually all that much that you don't measure while reloading. One of those things, of course, is brass. Now, among the many reasons one measures brass is to make sure that it isn't too long to cause issues when chambering. Hence, why we trim that brass. Now, I don't know about you, but if there's one thing that I absolutely hate the most when it comes to case prep, it's trimming. And if I can get out of doing it, I am always opting for the easy road. That said, you still have to measure that brass to make sure it's within specs. Now, you can do that any number of ways. The first is what most people probably use, and that's a pair of calipers or a micrometer. Pretty much stupid proof, but it's not exactly the fastest way of doing it. Another way of doing it is with a case length headspace gauge. Here is a Lyman case gauge, which among other things will tell you if the case is too long. It's a bit of a pain to use because on those, sorta kind of case lengths, is it too long? Is it within spec? So you still have to measure it. And obviously, your brass needs to be resized in order to go inside of that. The third way is also a case gauge, but in this style, this being the subject of today's review, the Lyman E-Zee Case Gauge. It's so easy that even I know how to use this, but should someone actually use it? Let's hopefully answer that question today. Now, if you're not familiar with how these things work, it's pretty simple. Each one of these slots represents the maximum length that specific cartridge case should be, according to SAMI, the Sporting Arms and Ammunition Manufacturers Institute. That is a mouthful. It's the American and sort of international body which sets the official dimensional standards for, among other things, ammunition. Now, Lyman offers a few different versions of this style of gauge. You can find them for cowboy action rounds, modern sporting rounds, pistol specific, and this one, which is a general gauge that has over 70 pistol and rifle calibers. It retails for US $29.95 or about $31 to $39 up here in Canada, depending on where you shop. To find out whether your brass conforms to that maximum length, you just simply take the case that you want to measure, find its slot on the gauge, and insert into it. If it fits, you're gold. If it doesn't fit, you must have quit. Okay, so let's give a quick example. Here we have a 30-06 case, and looking on the gauge, we can see that it has a spot for it right here. Placing the case in the slot, we can see that it fits and is therefore no longer than 2.494 inches, which is what the SAMI spec declares is the maximum length for this case. Pretty easy. I found this pretty useful when it comes to sorting brass before trimming. A few days ago, I ran over something like 120 cases of 30-06 through this, and in a few minutes found that only 12 actually needed to be trimmed. It saved me quite a bit of time not running dozens of cases through the trimmer, only to find that they didn't actually need any trimming. But is this something you should buy? Now, normally I call this part pros and cons, but today I'll divide it into why you should and shouldn't buy it. It's the same, but it's different. Now, as to why you should buy it. First, it is probably the quickest way of measuring case brass. If you have fingers that thing and eyes that see, you can plow through cases pretty quickly. You can also use it for one-offs, rather than pulling out the calipers, you can just grab that and measure it quickly. It's certainly of high quality construction. The gauge itself is of metal, about 2.5 millimeters thick, and there's no flex in this unless you really want to bend it. Also, the individual measurements themselves are accurate. I've looked at the measurements on the side and measured the slot with a set of calipers, and they're pretty much dead on. So I can't fault it for accuracy either. It's not terribly expensive either. cheaper than a good pair of calipers to be sure, but that's not really a strong point, I think, in my books. I think you're better served with a set of calipers since you aren't limited to the calipers that are on this, and you can use the calipers to measure anything. That said, your use case scenario might be different. Reasons not to buy the E-Zee Case Gauge. We ended on price as a positive, but let's also include it on the negative side of the ledger. This will only be useful to you if you reload a lot of different types of ammo that are on it, but more limited if you only do a few rounds listed on it. If you don't reload 416 Ribby or 6.5 Danish, the fact that they're on here means nothing to you. For me, I only have 5 rounds that I reload that are represented here, and personally, that's the bare minimum I think that would make this thing worthwhile. Take a look at the website. There's a link in the description to the product page to see how many of the calibers you reload are actually represented on the gauge and make up your own mind. Whether this is a failing will depend on your tolerance for such things, but the gauge measures the maximum length that a sized piece of brass can be, not the trim length. So while the maximum length for, this 30-06 case is 2.494 inches, the trim length is usually recommended at 2.484 inches. Can you reload 30-06 brass at 2.494 inch case length? Sure, it'll function just fine. But if you like to follow the recommendations in reloading manuals, that's probably going to be a negative for you. Finally, if you're into precision, you probably already wised up to the fact that the gauge only tells you if it's shorter or longer than max length, not what its actual measurement is. That's not good for precision-minded folks who want each piece of brass to be as identical as possible. So if that's a stop sign for you, understandable. Ultimately, it's useful as a coarse measure for trim sorting, but here's the problem. If you measure your brass with the maximum length in mind, not the trim length, you'll probably be trimming more in the long run. Well, let's take the 30-06 brass from earlier. The maximum length is 2.494 inches according to Sammy's spec. If you shoot brass that's at that length, it's almost a biblical certainty that you're going to have to trim afterwards. If you shot that same brass at 2.484 inches, the generally recommended trim length, depending on factors, there's a decent chance you won't have to trim right away. Assuming, of course, that you aren't seeking absolute precision with the length of each case. As one Amazon reviewer fairly noted, the gauge gets you in the ballpark. So, should you buy this? Well, I can't really answer that for you, to be honest, because there are assumptions built into why you would and you wouldn't use this, and your assumptions may determine whether you may or may not want to. If you want a coarse sorting of your brass, it works fine. Perhaps it's something for new reloaders. But I think experienced or precision-minded reloaders will want to use a caliper or micrometer. In fact, I'd say anyone who reloads should be using a good set of calipers over this. So I suppose that's your answer. Before we wrap up, a quick reminder that you can also find the Redneck Preppy on Odyssey.com. One day YouTube will decide to unpeople someone like me. So if you like watching my videos, be sure to sub to me over at Odyssey or bookmark my page over there as insurance. A link to my page over there is in the description below. At any rate, I hope you found the video to be at least somehow mildly entertaining, because Case Gauge is so very exciting, and vaguely informative. As always, may your brass never need trimming. Take care, and bye-bye.